Hey guys, Prowl 1701 here, and today we're going to talk about the Second Doctor. And my question is, how much does missing stories impact somebody trying to discover the Troughton era for the first time? And how much harder does it make them, it trying to learn to enjoy the Second Doctor and watch the Second Doctor? Now I remember seeing a ranking video, it's a couple years old now, and they had Troughton at the bottom, which immediately told me it was going to be a crap list, and it was. But their excuse in the list was because so much of his era was missing, they couldn't rank him higher, even though they had McGann's Doctor higher, and he hardly has any screen time at all. That would have been something, that would have been an excuse I would have let slide a little more in like 2010, 2011. I wouldn't have agreed with it, but I'd have let it slide. But now that so much of Troughton's era has been animated, and so much of his era you can see in one form or another, I don't feel like that excuse holds weight. I don't think missing episodes affects it as bad as it used to. But we're gonna discuss that. We're gonna talk about it because I don't think some people realize how much more missing episodes impact Troughton's Doctor than they do Hartnell's Doctor. Because we tend to think of missing episodes as just a 60s thing, but it really impacts the Second Doctor's era much more than the First Doctor's era. Because the First Doctor has 29 stories, but 17 of his stories are complete. Over half, with only 12 of his stories being impacted to any degree by missing episodes. I'm not even saying like mostly missing or completely missing, just in any way impacted. Like say Reign of Terror, for example, or 10th Planet, which are mostly complete. So most of Hartnell's stories are complete, and you can watch them in the way they were originally intended, or in their original form, I should say. Most of season 1, most of season 2, with really only season 3 being heavily hit by missing episodes. Unlike Troughton, where seasons 4 and 5 are in rough shape. Season 4 especially, with season 5 being almost half and half and season 6 being in pretty good shape. Because from season 1, out of the 8 stories, 6 of them are complete. With season 2, out of the 9 stories, 8 of them are complete. And season 3, of course, with 10 stories and only 3 of them are complete. So the Hartnell era, it's much easier for people to experience the Hartnell era, especially people who are just getting into Classic Who for the first time, or people who are just getting into 60s Who for the first time. You know, maybe it's fans who started with the modern show, people who have grown up with the modern show, and they want to experience some of the classic series. So maybe they've seen some of the 70s and 80s Who, but they haven't had a chance to watch 60s Who yet. It's a lot easier for them to experience Hartnell stories, especially in their original form, because so much of the Hartnell era is intact. The Troughton era, on the other hand, Patrick Troughton has 21 stories in his original run, not counting multi-doctor stories, but 66 to 69, he has 21 stories. Only 7 of them are complete. A third, not even half, a third of his stories are complete. 2/3 of his stories are incomplete to one degree or another. And most of his complete stories are from season 6, with 5 of the 7 stories being from season 6, which some would argue is his weakest season. I disagree, but some would argue that. A lot would argue that. And for instance, one of his complete stories being The Dominators, which is not the most interesting story in the world, let's be honest. And of course, the other 2 stories both being from season 5. None of his stories from season 4 are complete. Matter of fact, no stories from season 4 are complete, sadly. Which is a shame for me because that's my favorite Troughton season. I love season 4. Now, we have been lucky in the past decade that so much of the Troughton era has been animated. From the early animations, which of course just completed stories, so you're having to jump between surviving episodes and animated episodes, to the more modern post-power animations where they just animate the whole things regardless, and they do them in black and white and in color, some of them in 4:3 or widescreen, so you can have different forms of these to watch. And it's really interesting to me if someone, say you have a friend who's a Doctor Who fan like you are, but they are only familiar with the modern show, or they've seen maybe a handful of Tom Baker and some stuff from the 80s. but you really want to get them into Troughton just because you love Troughton, like I love Troughton, and you want to share Troughton with them. What do you show them first? Do you show them a fully surviving story, like, say, Tomb of the Cybermen or something, or Enemy of the World, or The Mine Robber? Or do you show them one of the more modern animations because it's in color, it's in widescreen, maybe they can connect with that better? Because you have to wonder if somebody who's 18, 19, 25, someone who's watching a Troughton story for the first time, who is younger, how are they going to adjust to watching a black and white show in the 4:3 aspect ratio with all of the, budget limitations that 60s Doctor Who had? Are they going to be able to adjust to that? Or you could show them something like the Macroterra, which is in color, in widescreen, and of course is one of the stories where they did take some liberties to improve the story, and which it does for Macroterra. I love Macroterra. Or do you show them something like Evil of the Daleks, though at 7 parts it could be a tad long? Do you show them something that they may be able to connect better with because it's a decently good animation, budget-wise, it's in color, again, it's widescreen, something like that? That's one interesting question right there. I think you have to ask if you're showing someone who's not really familiar with the Troughton era. Do you start with surviving episodes or do you start with a complete animation? I definitely don't think you start with one that jumps back and forth. Like, I would never show somebody the moon base first. I love the moon base, but not something where you're jumping between animation and live action that much. Same thing with the Invasion. I love the Invasion, but with the animations in it, plus the fact that 8 parts, it's probably too long for a first story. I wouldn't show them the War Games first because the younger generation, sometimes I think they have a trouble with pacing of classic Who because things just moved slower back then, so 10 parts might be a little much for someone. I would want to show them a 4-parter. I think a lot of people's go-to is Tomb of the Cybermen. That has its own issues. There are certain racism issues that some people would definitely have issues with how some of the people treat Toberman in that story. I think that would rub some people the wrong way. Tomb of the Cybermen is simply a bit overrated anyway. And while it has some very iconic imagery, the Cybermen never overly feel that threatening compared to how they do in some of the other 60s stories. I do think Tomb is just a bit overrated while still being very good. But what other complete one would you show them? That short Enemy of the World, I think, would be a good one. The Mine Robber, I think, would be a good one. I don't really know for complete Troughton ones. I think that's one of the reasons why it might be harder for people to discover Troughton. It's hard to know where to begin when watching the Troughton era because it's such a hodgepodge of some complete stories, some animated stories, and some stories that are a combination of both, with a few of them still telesnap recons. Now, we have been blessed because of all of Troughton's missing stories, all 14 of them, 10 of them have been animated. Only 4 of his stories now exist where you basically have to watch a recon for at least part of it, and that's, of course, all of the Highlanders. Highlanders is the only Troughton story now that you can't watch in either surviving form or animated form for all of the episodes. It's the only one of his that's completely missing now. The Space Pirates, that recon is hard to get through because no telesnaps exist. It gets progressively harder to get through, although the surviving episode 2 is fine. But that's certainly not something I would start anyone on. Enemy of the World, I'm not sure. I haven't watched yet, but at least some of it still exists. And then Underwater Menace is at least half complete, but I still wouldn't start anyone on it. So it's interesting just how much more the missing episodes really impact Troughton and how much they hurt his era, which is such a shame because Troughton's such a good Doctor. I love Troughton. He's my second favorite Doctor. And so much of Troughton's performance is down to his physicality in the role, what he does with his body language, his facial expressions, how he reacts to things. It really is such a shame. So I'm grateful for every episode we have, every bit of surviving footage of him that exists, even just something that's like 20 or 30 seconds. It's nice to see that. Like little clips of Power of the Daleks. And luckily, some of his stories, like Web of Fear, it's mostly intact. You can either do the telesnap recon or the animation for episode 3. I think I prefer the telesnap recon. But it's a shame because if it was complete, that would be a great first story to show people for Troughton. Hopefully episode 3 will turn up one day. So yeah, it's just interesting to me when I got to thinking about it, how the Hartnell era is so much more accessible to people just getting into 62 because so much of his era is complete. Whereas Troughton's era is a lot harder to watch because you have very few complete stories, only a third of his era, and the ones that are complete might not be the ones you want to show someone first. And then you have the animated stories, which are hit or miss depending on the story. Like Fury from the Deep's a great story, but I don't like that animation. Macroterra might not be the best story in the world, but I love its animation, and the liberties they take really bump that one up in my estimates. Evil is fantastic, but it might be a little long at 7 parts for someone just getting into Who. And then again, you have those stories that are just both, like the Moon Base or the Ice Warriors, where it's a combination of animated and surviving episodes. So that was just something I thought about because I don't think a lot of people really take the time to realize just the difference between the Hartnell era and the Troughton era when it comes to missing episodes and how much that impacts the watchability of those eras. I find I don't mind the Troughton era. I was about to say I don't mind it being missing. I mind it being missing. Of course, I want more Troughton episodes found. I want more Troughton episodes animated. I love the Troughton era. But it's not an obstacle I have trouble overcoming. I can watch the animations just fine, except for Fury from the Deep. And I can watch the recons fine for the most part. Space Pirates was hard to get through at the end. But I do cherish every complete story we have of his. And I'm kind of curious how you would get somebody started on the Troughton era, if it was a modern Who fan, what you would do, knowing the situation that the Troughton era is in with, I think it's how many episodes did he do? I think 66 of his episodes exist and 53 episodes are missing. That's a huge chunk. So that was kind of my thoughts. It turned into more of a ramble than I wanted it to, but that was kind of my thoughts on that, just talking about how the Troughton era was impacted far more than the Hartnell era, and Troughton has so many fewer complete stories than Hartnell does, and it makes his era harder, I think, for people just getting into 62 to really know where to begin. Yeah, I think that sums that up. So I want to know what you think on this. Comment down below and let me know. Other things to do, don't forget to click the like button and the subscribe button. That does help me out. I am trying to reach 1,000 subscribers in 2023. We're well on our way to that. I think I'm hitting about 949 right now, so the channel's been growing regularly. I appreciate each and every one of you for that. I also have a Patreon if you would like to support me there. There's a link to that down in the description below. That does help me keep the bills paid, so I certainly appreciate it. I want to give a shout out to some of my top tier patrons, Stephen Crane, Colin Coney, and Finn Perkins. I appreciate their support, as I do the support of all of my patrons. It does make a difference. I also have a P.O. box if there's anything you would like to send me to look at and review, and a link to my Amazon wish list is down there as well. Most importantly, though, thank you for watching.